So scenario 3 then. The final test you have them doing involves the gymnasts doing 10-metre sprints and measuring their times. Before the test, you have the gymnasts doing a health screening, providing you with important medical details you might need to know. The gymnasts are told to repeat the sprint 5 times with a 30-second break between each sprint. You're doing this individually and measuring each individual. As the researcher is running out of time, they speed up the process by decreasing the gymnast's break to 20 seconds instead of 30. They do not feel the need to tell the gymnasts of this change to their testing method from the one they consented to. Upon completion by all gymnasts, the researcher parts with a simple "Thank you, you may go now." One of the main issues in this scenario is deception. The researcher doesn't tell them they're reducing their rest time. This can cause psychological harm because the participant has been lied to, so they may be less trusting in the future, potentially causing issues sociologically in the future because they may be less trusting of their friends or family or any future research. It may mean there's less participation in research in the future as well. In this case, the participant could also experience physical harm as a result of the researcher's omission, failure to tell the participant an applicable part of the research. Due to the shorter breaks, they have less recovery time. This could cause injury to the participant as it is a fairly maximal test with little time to recover between. Instead, the researcher should either not reduce the recovery time at all, or they should inform the participants of this change and get them to consent to this change, both verbally and through a new consent form including this change, allowing them, of course, to withdraw if they wish. The researcher has done scientific misconduct, as they were not following the legal obligations of scientific research due to their deception and lack of safety measures. The consequences of this deception could be more costly if there were to be any harm to the individuals, as this could be reported. If this was the case, then the researcher could face temporary suspension, as there are multiple wrongs here that put the participants at unnecessary risk. So the lack of informed consent, as they didn't consent to those specific conditions, and deception in form of omission, and the scientific misconduct as the researcher has changed the test without running a new risk assessment or risk-benefit analysis. This would mean the researcher cannot perform any research in this time of suspension. This means they can't make any money from the research if they're with a company, so there's a financial factor that plays into this, meaning because of it impacting the researcher's personal life, they are more likely to listen to any ethical training that they are given because they want to better the process so that they don't have to receive the consequence of having financial debt. So yeah, again, they might be given ethical training in their suspension to prevent the same issue from occurring again, as they would hopefully learn from this ethical training and be more aware of the ethical issues within their research. They also might lose BASES accreditation. This means that their work is less likely to be referenced and used both in the present and in the future, as others are made aware of the mistakes made by the individual. In terms of test sequence, they did obviously have a test sequence in terms of having set recovery periods and test periods. They also have multiple attempts to ensure that they are getting accurate results. However, like previously mentioned, the sequence was faulted as the researcher decreased the planned recovery time. The recovery time was putting the participants at risk due to how small it was. The decrease in recovery time should have led to a completely new risk assessment based around the changes, a new method, a new informed consent. There are many issues with the researcher decreasing the recovery period and not telling the individual, consequences of which I have just gone through. So another issue is the lack of a debriefing. So upon completion of the test, the researcher sends the gymnasts away without giving them a debriefing of how their results will be used and how the research done on them will help, so the scientific value. This could leave the participants confused or uncertain about what their information is used for and what happens next. As a result, this could cause psychological harm to the participant. They could be worried about where their results go. This could also lead to the researcher doing more ethical training as a consequence, as they need to learn what is wrong with their lack of debriefing so they know how to better themselves next time. The consequences for the participant are not as severe for this, therefore the consequences to the researcher are not as severe either. It's mainly in terms of ethics, so the ethical training would be the main consequence there. The positive of this scenario is a health screening that was done. So they had the participants do a health screening each with the researcher to ensure that they don't have any medical conditions that could affect the tests or could put the individual at risk due to the tests. This health screening is done privately where their information is confidential, abiding by the Data Protection Act, and where they can feel comfortable to speak truthfully to the researcher. It's the researcher's responsibility to ensure that the participants are healthy and able to do the research without risking their health, and if there is a risk, they must do a subject disclaimer. The participants are asked to sign at the end to confirm that they have been truthful, ensuring that no legal action can be taken against the researcher if they are lying. This good practice also links closely to subject disclaimers. So at the start of the test, one of the health screenings revealed one of the gymnasts has high blood pressure. The researcher warns the individual of the consequences of this and how the test could put them at risk, advising them against it. They want to continue anyway, so the researcher has them sign a subject disclaimer. Again, this ensures no legal action can be taken against the researcher, as the individual has consented to taking part despite their condition. If they hadn't signed a disclaimer and something was to happen to the individual, then the researcher would be in serious trouble and could potentially face prison or a fine at minimum because of how serious the bad practice is. Failure to check the current condition and health of the individual before having them testing is very serious and is against the law. They lawfully have to check the condition of the individual before they undergo research, because the research could potentially increase the risk of the individual's condition and put them at health risk. So there are also obviously documentations that must occur during research. This is an example of a risk assessment. So this was for the last scenario, the risk assessment that was completed. So you can see the hazards, the people at risk, the controls to be in place, the likelihood, outcome and risk rating, and the actions necessary. It has a date, because the risk assessment should be done and updated before, immediately, like right before the research. Should be told the location of the research, who the risk assessment was assessed by, and what the activity was. Should also include an accident report form. Here we have an example of informed consent. So basically this must include their answers to any PARQs, and any questions are honest and correct to the best of their knowledge. It must include purposes of the research, an understanding of the risks, understanding that they can withdraw from research at any given time, understanding that there's no legal obligation to give reasons for their withdrawal, and understanding that they will obey any instructions given to them that in terms of health and safety, and this must be signed by the individual and dated. Going back to the accident report form, so these must be filled out if any accidents occur, of course. So in the case of scenario 2, where there was an injury that occurred where they twisted their knee, a full accident report form must be completed. It's a legal obligation, otherwise legal action could potentially be taken against the researcher. Another important documentation is a health screening questionnaire, or PARQ. So this should include questions about the individual's medical history. So that could be their own and their family as well. So here you can see they've been asked if there's a history of any heart problems, diabetes, asthma, allergies, cancer, seizures, high blood pressure, any recent surgery, high cholesterol, a family history of coronary heart disease, and if their doctor has ever told them not to exercise. All this ensures is that the individual is fit to participate in the research, or whether they're not. If they aren't, the researcher must be aware of that so that they can have them sign a subject disclaimer if the participant still wishes to continue, and the researcher needs to be aware of any conditions in case something was to occur in the research. For example, someone with diabetes might have a low in the middle of the research, and the researcher needs to know how to deal with that and be aware of that. Or if someone was perhaps to have a heart attack in the middle of research, they need to know that they have that history so that they can tell an ambulance or paramedics when they come to treat the individual.